to Third Phase of Moon. My name is Blake Cousins, and in this episode, we're going to go over, by popular demand, the Alien-Human Project Part 2. Dr. Roger Leir and his claims of removing alien implants isn't a doubt. It is scientific fact. Now for this exclusive Part 2, the Alien-Human Project. Let's get to it.
It's the alien implant doctor, world-renowned. Dr. Leir, when we made Alien-Human Project Part 1, it had global impact. We've had people that came out that never wanted to talk about their experiences, and now, because of the courage that you've put yourself out to get those implants, they now have come forward. What inspired you to continue to do this in the face of all these ridicule?
Well, you mean, of course, the fine line that I walk.
Yes.
The line of academia, medicine, and research into a tremendously unknown subject. And I say unknown subject, although it's been in existence for thousands of years, because there really isn't that much physical evidence of, things that happen within the field of ufology. We've seen things flying in their skies. We've looked at drawings and cave paintings and wood carvings that have been in existence for thousands of years. But, people have been looking for the so-called smoking gun. And that's what we seem to have found. Maybe on purpose and maybe by accident. I'm not convinced to this day. Why is it that I'm the only one, it seems to be, on this entire planet that seems to be removing objects from individuals and then subject them to severe academic analysis and come up with things that are not from this world?
You just got to my next point exactly. When you look at a photograph now, 50 years ago a photograph would have been proof, but now with Photoshop it can be doctored. What you've been removing is the smoking gun, and a lot of critics, especially the skeptics, always have an explanation for it. Let's go deeper into why we can prove this is the smoking gun and how you would want to invite the academics to look at the lab reports that you've gotten.
Well, as to whether I consider myself an academic science, I don't. I'm more like the plumber or the purveyor of the merchandise. I get it out of the human body, the individual that has it, and then I present it to science, as an ordinary individual. I'm sure they have some respect because of my medical background, but it's the word that comes from them after analysis that they are telling me that these objects contain things like non-terrestrial isotopic ratios, that they contain carbon nanotube structures, which are very complex. And we're looking at a technology which 8, maybe 9 years ago, there were scientists, noted academic scientists, that said they couldn't exist. And now there are companies who are actually using them, making them. Japan is trying to make them into a cloth so that they make clothing out of them. They're talking about a space tower because they are the strongest substance known to man. And if you build a space tower that goes up a mile or two above the Earth and then launch a vehicle from there, you've saved a tremendous amount of money in fuel because you don't have to defeat the amount of gravity that you do from an Earth launch. So we find carbon nanotechnology, and we find things that we don't understand. We find gold spheres, for example, that we don't understand what they do. We find apertures in the metal which are only as wide as one atom. Now that's pretty small. And we haven't been able to yet look down into that aperture and see what's down in there. But one day we will do that. We know that they emit radio waves. We know that they have electromagnetic fields and an electromagnetic residue, which lasts for about 30 to 60 days following their removal. So these are all scientific facts. These are facts that in written reports I get from academia, and I mean top academia, because we have, you know, 3 of the world's finest nuclear physicists on our science board for ANS research. And that's not including the myriad of other well-respected laboratories, like Los Alamos National Labs, Southwest Labs, and I could go on and on and on with a list of laboratories.
You know, one thing I love is what separates you from all the other researchers is you are a doctor and a scientist that works with data. Like you said, you're just a plumber. You pull these out and it's the lab reports that are telling you what this is. So everybody out there who's listening and watching this documentary, request the lab reports. They are available to be read. As a matter of fact, aren't they on your website?
Yes, there's a number of different laboratories. The reports listed on the website. And we also have taken consideration that the initial scientific results came from the National Institute for Discovery Science, which was Bob Bigelow. And he is the one that paid for and got the reports and material from Los Alamos National Labs and New Mexico Tech. So I had nothing to do with it at all, just presenting him with the specimens and having him send them to the laboratory. And when they came back originally, there was a giant booklet of data. However, there was no report. And that irritated Mr. Bigelow to the point where he called the lab up and he said, look, I'm paying for this. I want a report. And that's when the first report came in, and the scientists that looked at it said these were closest to meteorite samples. Now that was a shock.
You just mentioned Arthur or Bob Bigelow, who was well known for the Skinwalker Ranch. His name has been thrown around ufology for the last couple of years. He's somewhat been in the limelight. Do you think with his Skinwalker Ranch, the laboratory results that he got from funding your research, did he possibly make anything from what he learned?
And monetary gain, absolutely no. He put out all his money, never asked me to spend a penny. And now he, of course, has a company called Bigelow Aerospace. And with the consent of the government, he's in a position where he can actually regulate some things because of the nature of the space business.
When Mr. Bigelow became involved, he's linked with SpaceX, which is making enormous leaps. They just tested a new rocket, which is called the Grasshopper, a reusable rocket that's not going to burn up in the atmosphere. Do you think, with the lab reports that I was saying, do you think he used any of the findings to apply them to his technologies in SpaceX or anything else that he's doing?
That I can't answer. I don't know, because I'm not knowledgeable of what it takes to put a vehicle into space. Now the next thing is that I know that he took designs that he purchased from NASA. For example, the expandable module. That didn't have anything to do with what the findings that I was finding with the implant subject. But yet it took a technology that he developed, and he put up, the Genesis space module, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, and then looked at all the data coming in, and they are much, much safer space vehicles than the International Space Station.
Let's go back and talk about the actual technology. One thing I love is our technology as a human race grows, we're able to dive in these things deeper. One thing you mentioned was single-sized atom particles. What on earth can be made into a size of one atom? Virtually nothing that a human being can do, right?
Well, now we can use single-size atom and what we call nanotechnology. That is nanotechnology. If you take a single carbon atom and you string 2 of them together, and then 3 and then 4 and put them in a circle, then you have a circle of carbon nano atoms, and if you extend this into a tube, you have a CNT, or a carbon nanotube. Now, if you extend that out, then you have something that's similar to wiring without insulation. So let's say you take one of these carbon nano strands and you wrap two of them together, and then you can actually make a cable and you get a carbon nano bundle. But this is sub-microscopic. You have to look at this on the level of an electron microscope. So we have it. We are using it. And this is from what I understand from reliable sources, is the basis for communication in the future. Just as Star Trek talked about, going to subspace frequency. Well, how do you communicate if you're in deep space? Are you going to wait the length of time that it takes us to get a signal from Mars back to Earth? No. So you go into another technology, which is scalar wave technology, faster than the speed of light. And some laboratories, very few, I won't mention who they are, but they are conducting experiments with scalar waves, and they told me that this is the communication of the future, both in television and radio communication.
Carbon nanotubes, or the nanotechnology that we humans are using now, was not available when you first removed the first implant, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Carbon nanotubes were an argument. It was only existent in the minds of certain scientists that said, perhaps carbon nanotubes exist in nature, but we can't find them. Perhaps they could exist if you could make them. But then the other half said, no, it's impossible. You can't make them. And now to see what that technology was then and what the technology is today, because a carbon nanotube today can be single-walled, double-walled, triple-walled, and you still have that aperture in the center, like the center of a hose. And you can put other material in that center, and that's called a doped carbon nanotube. So let's say you make a very small one, very small doped carbon nanotube. Let's say that the substance in the middle of it is a very potent antibiotic. You can give that person an injection of that antibiotic in this carbon nanotube and have the carbon nanotube go directly to the area of the infection, a tumor or something else, or a drug to treat cancer, for example. So the implications of carbon nanotube technology alone are, pardon the pun, out of this world.
You mentioned that there were scientists debating on both sides, yet you had something in your possession that was artificially made that contained those. Now, do you think, fast forward to when humans started using things on the nanotechnology level, do you think that it's possible the government may have seen your lab reports and may have used certain labs, you've used that to actually get to us humans using this nanotechnology?
Well, the possibility of government looking at my work and copying it, so to speak, or using the things that our scientists have illuminated, I doubt whether that's true, because a lot of this may have gone back to Roswell, back engineering. We're talking about almost 60 some odd years. They've had 60 some odd years, let's say, jump on anything that I ever did. So I'm sure that within the black budget projects, they already know all the stuff that we're learning and trying to present to the public and to industry. Because some say that black budget technology, in compared to academic science, is 100 years ahead.
But again, when we're talking about carbon nanotubes, you also mentioned something about gold sphere. Can you expand on that a little bit?
These small gold spheres that we find, but we don't know what they do. We also find what are called orthorhombic crystals. And these are crystals composed of sodium chloride. Now, sodium chloride is just ordinary table salt. But the crystals of the salt are random. There's no particular shape. These are a particular rectangular shape and in varying sizes. So they're called orthorhombic sodium chloride crystals. Now, if we think back to the early days of radio, and what did we have? We had a crystal set, you know, and a copper wire, and an earphone, and a battery, and we were able to get a miraculous radio station through a crystal. Well, crystallography, or crystallography, the study of crystals today, still can't explain what happens with the atomic structure inside a crystal that will allow a frequency to be carried and then received.
And yet
as far as we know.
And we've been using that.
And we've been using that constantly until we went to a different technology, which was the vacuum tube and then transistor technology. But in all the radios, all during World War II, all the aircraft radios, when you switched from one station to the other, all a lever was doing was going from one crystal to another crystal to another crystal. They were all multiplex crystal sets.
Again, more proof that using something without possibly knowing it, and what can that lead to. Now, I want to focus more on why this is the smoking gun, because we know it's the smoking gun, yet those people out there watching this, some of the people who left on the comments, and this first one was released to great fanfare, and there was a lot of people that said wow, this really is happening and it's there. But there still is others who are on the fence. Let's dive deeper into proving to them. We got the lab reports, we see the carbon nanotubes, we see the gold spheres. Let's talk about the radio waves and the electromagnetism results, and what else you can tell everybody.
Okay, first of all, there's a certain percentage of these that we've removed, that about 70%, that emit a radio wave in the FM band. And when we looked at a classified chart of where these frequencies occur, both in the kilohertz and megahertz range, we know that they are deep space, fixed or mobile deep space frequencies. Now, the question is, are we really detecting deep space frequencies, or are we merely detecting a harmonic of some other transmission of another kind of a wave, as that I mentioned before, a scalar wave technology that enters our electromagnetic spectrum, and we get what's called a harmonic. And that harmonic in our spectrum are these radio waves that we receive. Now, the other possibility, of course, which in today's world you can't deny, is the possibility that a deal has been made between somebody from out there and somebody from here, so that they can gain the same data that somebody from out there is listening to. And I believe this is biological data, and it's data having to do with the progression of our DNA. Because if we look at abduction cases all over the world, we see that there's the taking of sperm and ova. That means a genetic experiment is being carried out on human beings on the face of this planet. And if that's true, then maybe they want to find out, just like we do using human logic, how long a bear sleeps or hibernates during the winter, what the metabolism of the body. For example, John Glenn, when he went into space, he complained on national TV of having to swallow implants because it was necessary for mission control to know his body functions, and the only way that they could get it in was to have him swallow them. So he did. He swallowed them, and they got the information. But, you know, to make a comparison, suppose somebody else wanted to know the information that NASA was getting. They would, you know, tune in on it, and they would be able to get it too. because they're not operating in a scalar wave or unknown technology. So those are the two possibilities. One is that they are true radio frequencies that we're getting, or that they are harmonic of something like a scalar wave which travels through space faster than the speed of light.
Since the last film, Alien Human Project 1, there have been significant changes, such as the citizen hearing. Can you tell everybody in the world who's watching this what changes you've had, including your testimony there, what else you've done, what else your research has unlocked?
Well, in case the viewer of this program doesn't know what the citizen's hearing is, it was a hearing that was conducted in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club. And it was set up to mimic the way a hearing would be conducted in Congress. And we had retired congressional members.
Implant doctor, world-renowned. Dr. Leir, when we made Alien Human Project Part 1, it had global impact. We've had people that came out that never wanted to talk about their experiences, and now, because of the courage that you've put yourself out to get those implants, they now have come forward. What inspired you to continue to do this in the face of all these ridicule?
Well, you mean, of course, the fine line that I walk.
Yes.
The line of academia, medicine, and research into a tremendously unknown subject. And I say unknown subject, although it's been in existence for thousands of years, because there really isn't that much physical evidence of, things that happen within the field of ufology. We've seen things flying in their skies. We've looked at drawings and cave paintings and wood carvings that have been in existence for thousands of years. But people have been looking for the so-called smoking gun, and that's what we seem to have found. Maybe on purpose, and maybe by accident. I'm not convinced to this day. Why is it that I'm the only one, it seems to be, on this entire planet that seems to be removing objects from individuals and then subject them to severe academic analysis and come up with things that are not from this world?
You just got to my next point exactly. When you look at a photograph now, 50 years ago, a photograph would have been proof, but now with Photoshop, it could be doctored. What you've been removing is the smoking gun, and a lot of critics, especially the skeptics, always have an explanation for it. Let's go deeper into why we can prove this is the smoking gun and how you would want to invite the academics to look at the lab reports that you've gotten.
Well, as to whether I consider myself an academic science, I don't. I'm more like the plumber or the purveyor of the merchandise. I get it out of the human body, the individual that has it, and then I present it to science, as an ordinary individual. I'm sure they have some respect because of my medical background, but it's the word that comes from them after analysis that they are telling me that these objects contain things like non-terrestrial isotopic ratios, that they contain carbon nanotube structures, which are very complex. And we're looking at a technology which 8, maybe 9 years ago, there were some.
Welcome back to Third Phase of Moon. My name's Blake Cousins, and in this episode, we're going to go over, by popular demand, the Alien Human Project Part 2. Dr. Roger Leir and his claims of removing alien implants isn't a doubt. It is scientific fact. Now for this exclusive Part 2, the Alien Human Project. Let's get to it.
Unidentified